Lake, Michigan at Concordia University, Wisconsin. And today we're going to have a great conversation with Trevor Sutton and Dr. Brian Smith. So we're looking forward to this. It's a very timely conversation where we'll be talking about how we can build healthy digital habits and how we can keep the technologies that God has allowed us to create in their proper place. But before we get going, again, we're glad that you've joined us. If you're watching with us, say hi in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. If you have any questions about technology use, what you're hearing in the world about technology, social media, you name it, we've got the experts here with our pastor-psychiatrist dream team of Trevor Sutton and Brian Smith. So we're going to set the bar up there for you, gentlemen. And again, because this is such a we were talking about it before we started going live about how it really is a very, very hot topic right now. You can't watch the news without seeing news about technology use and social media and how that's affecting us. Feel free to share this video with your friends and followers so that they can join the conversation and we can get more people talking about how we can redeem technology. So, Trevor and Brian, how are you today?
Doing great. Exciting. Just as you were saying, just exciting how the book coming out, but then also such a timely thing that just amazing how this is suddenly in the news all the time.
Absolutely.
I'm just really looking forward to talking about something that's such a meaningful subject and very impactful.
So we've got our friend Deb Burma joining us from Columbus, Nebraska. It's always good to have Deb chiming in and sharing her thoughts. She always has good things to say. So looking forward to engaging with our friends in the comments as well. So as we start thinking about this conversation, and there are so many different avenues that we can take. But before let's set the stage. When we talk about technology, often our minds go to the latest and greatest gadgets, the newest iPhone, the latest drone, that can go flying around, smart cars, pick all of that. But you share that technology actually is more than that. It's ancient and modern. It's physical and non-physical. So before we really dive into talking about technology and its impacts and using it wisely, set the stage for us, if you will. Trevor, when we talk about technology, what is this grand scope of what we're talking about so that we're starting from the same place?
Sure. Yeah, it's easy to think that this is the first time that we've ever had this conversation, as a society, as a culture, that we're suddenly stumbling on something new, technology, and now we all want to talk about it. And in fact, this has been a conversation that goes way back to antiquity. So for instance, Aristotle talked about technology. He talked about techne, and this big broad domain of techne. Underneath that, you get making, doing, design, technique, art, things like that. So all of these things are subtopics of techne. And so because of that, what counts as technology? Well, in some ways, anything that's created, crafted, designed, anything that involves technique. So in that sense, we're talking about roads. We're talking about baking bread is a technique that kind of depends on a technology. Codex Bibles, scrolls, and then obviously more modern things, digital tablets, computers, so forth. The reason why we often think about new things with technology is those are things that have kind of ruptured the status quo. And so we see them more readily because they're replacing something else. So that's why the conversation often tends to be on newer technologies. But in fact, newer technologies are just displacing older technologies. And so really, once you define it that way, it's all around us. We interact with technology every time we're interacting with something that's been designed, crafted, or made.
So basically, it's the whole creator creation piece, right? So anything created, really, we can't allow that to.
In that sense, God is in favor of technology, you might say, because as creator, we hear these techne words already in Genesis, that God designs and crafts. We hear about God granting the Holy Spirit to craftsmen to create the tabernacle and things like that. So absolutely. I mean, the Bible has technology in it too.
So there was a, oh, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to add that technology essentially throughout history are tools that are then sort of gifted to the hands of man. We know that a knife can be technology. A knife could be used for cutting a steak or stabbing someone, or murder. And so we really shouldn't think of this digital technology that much different than all these different tools we've had throughout history. And we have to be very thoughtful about them in terms of the use of these tools.
So some time back, I remember I was talking with you, Trevor, about a pastor that I had been chatting with, and I was telling him about the book that you two have worked on, Redeeming Technology. And he was expressing some potential interest. So, well, maybe we have the authors talk to us at some point in the future. Trevor, your question back to me was, does he want me to be for it or against it? So before we dive into some of the other nuts and bolts of all of this, is technology good or bad? Either one of you, is technology good or bad?
Yeah, Brian, go for it.
Both. I mean, it depends on the use. And so I think we don't want to be black and white in our thinking. It's not all or nothing. I mean, digital technology is part of our lives to stay. It'll probably evolve over time. But what's much more important is, thinking about, obviously, there are good aspects of it. I think if we got rid of everything that could hurt you, nobody would drive a car. We'd all walk around, and take 5 weeks to get to California or something. So I think that we have to recognize that there are many good aspects and positive aspects of digital technology, but you also have to be very aware of sort of the unintended or sometimes hidden intended side effects or aspects of technology that aren't as advertised. And so we think it's very, very, very thoughtful of our use, because pretty much everything is good or bad depending on the user and the motivations behind, because man is sinful by nature. So we have to be very reflective on understanding that is part of our technology.
So Trevor, do you want to take it one step further and tell us if technology is neutral or biased?
So there's a big conversation, within scholarly circles on this thing. Is technology neutral? Does it incline us to act and behave in a certain way? Or does it go as far as determining everything, the values we have, the way we interact? And there's a continuum of those things. And you can find different scholars, different thinkers, different individuals, family, friends, so forth, that fall somewhere on, nope, it's just so neutral. It's sitting there waiting for you to do something with it. Or people who say, no, this stuff really dictates our life. And so there's this spectrum, where I have found a good place for that is talking about how it inclines us, or it invites us to act in a certain way, yet we still have human agency to bring to bear on that. An example that I've used before, I think we use in the book, is scissors. Scissors are inclined for right-handed people to use them. I'm left-handed, so every time I grab scissors, I'm painfully aware of how they've been designed. The same thing in a lecture hall. All the fold-out handwriting things are all on the right side, and so the poor left-handed people have to, careen over. That's technology inclining you to work and function in a particular way, right-handed in that case. But I can still exert my agency and say, no, I'm going to use these scissors with my left hand, or no, I'm going to use this handwriting thing this way. But just to have that awareness of it's not entirely neutral, but it does invite you to work in a certain way, yet we still can retain that. And I'm glad to hear that Deb is also left-handed.
Yeah, she feels the pain.
We're not alone.
We'll have our left-handed support club coming in for our authors to remember that when you visit us. Nora, where do you want to take us next?
Sure. So I know when people think of technology, one of the first things that they think about is social media accounts. So how has social media and the instant gratification changed attention rates?
Maybe I'll tackle that first. I think what's tricky is that our attention goes to whatever gives us the most pleasure or stimulation in the form of dopamine. And our brains, we think, run on dopamine. There's an area called the mesolimbic area of your brain that's a reward center. And anytime we do, social media is designed to continually either give dopamine or evoke some sort of emotional response. And so then we're trained to go back to it for additional stimulation. And so, I worry sometimes as a teacher that, I tell my students, I can never be as exciting as your smartphone. So please put them away, because I can't compete with that, because my natural reinforcement of the pleasure I give them is not going to be the same as, a like on Facebook. Although everyone under the age of like 30 says nobody uses Facebook anymore. But anyway,
Well, here we are.
we are, and I use it. Okay. But Instagram or Snapchat, there's so many different things where they get that sort of immediate stimulation, and I can't give them that. I can't give someone the intensity and the dopamine rush that a Call of Duty gives you when you're playing it. And so I think, unfortunately, what happens is if you're used to this high level of stimulation, high level of dopamine response, when you do normal life things like sit and try to read a book or sit, through a play that's 2 hours long, is that especially the younger generations are not getting that kind of dopamine rush, and therefore their attention wanders. Because really, in some ways, the more dopamine action you have, the more attention you have. Actually, the medications used for ADHD run on dopamine. So dopamine and attention are really linked strongly together.
It's amazing, too, just thinking about what you're saying, Dr. Smith, and conversations run so much slower than Facebook, the world of Facebook or Instagram. I mean, I think of a conversation, the speed of that is kind of plodding along. A good conversation might take an hour, and that's so much slower than just the rapidity of scrolling and just this bombardment of new things to think about. And so certainly I can see how the idea of a slow conversation could languish in a world that we expect things to happen now, fast, already.
You saying that makes me think of my son's cell phone. He's 15. And I pick up his cell phone and look at his text threads. And at one point I picked it up, and there were some 280 notifications sitting in his text, in his messages. And I opened up the message, which later he yelled at me because he wanted to see how high up the notifications would go. And he was purposely not looking at the thread, which he's, not normal when it comes to technology. But I looked at it, and it was just what you said, Trevor, ping, 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 ping. But it was all either one or two letters, an emoji, a GIF, a meme, and just for over 200 interactions from this group of friends that were texting. And like, talk about fast and not a lot of substance there. So I could see how our young folks would have a hard time sitting down and zeroing in on a conversation that required like face-to-face interaction.
Yeah, you could. The author of the book The Shallows kind of used the analogy of what we do today is it's like a jet ski skipping across the top of the water, as opposed to like deep sea diving into a book or a conversation or a work of art or anything.
So we're seeing all over the news right now with the Facebook and Instagram news coming out of the former employee, and all over the congressional hearings where the focus on how technology and social media are affecting mental health, not just mental health of adults, but younger folks in particular. Tell us, how do you react to that? And maybe, Brian, tell us more about the different mental health challenges that can come when we allow technology to have too strong of a place in our lives.
I think there are two kinds of effects. There are the effects that are the more rare but very serious effects, as far as things like cyberbullying or influence on eating disorders and body image, and those sorts of more sort of pathological or clinical effects. And then I think there are the more subtle effects in terms of wasting of time and the superficiality of a lot of it, and those sorts of effects. Some effects are, I think, much more immediate or dangerous, and then the more common effects are the boiled frog, the slowly rising water kind of effects, where I think a lot of us don't realize we're marinating in this stuff all the time. But there's a lot of course, we know fear of missing out. It's a superficial representation of life. There's a lot of photoshopping and other stuff as far as our bodies and how we look. So there's not a realistic view of ourselves. And then there tends to be, for children already at risk or adults already at risk, folks that already are predisposed to depression or anxiety. The sort of forces, the fact that social media doesn't make you happy. It's sort of like a bottomless well as far as you go to it maybe looking for love in all the wrong places, or you're looking for like these acceptance and these good feelings, and you're not getting that from that, and then you feel even worse because it doesn't satisfy, and you're not seeking out the sort of meaningful satisfaction that you find from other things. And so I think for folks that are at risk, yes, I mean, certain kinds of media can influence. I mean, there's a well-known psychological phenomenon called contagion. Just as a virus can be contagious, you can have suicidal thoughts can be contagious. Now, not for everybody, but for folks that are already at risk or sort of on that edge, it can influence. There can be emotional contagion. Emotions can be contagious. If lots of anger on the web, that those sort of feelings can be contagious. And so I think the concern is that for folks who spend a lot of time on social media and other digital technologies and already are at risk, or not getting fed in other ways that are more meaningful, that those individuals could be definitely at risk of having major depression, anxiety, maybe greater risk of substance use, body image issues, and those sorts of things. And that's not even counting, once again, all the other folks that are influenced in other ways, not to the point of being, seeing a psychiatrist or being in a hospital, but nonetheless, things that do affect our lives in a way, in some ways that maybe pull us farther away from God.
One of the things too, just as Brian's saying that, the research often says the best cure for this, just limit your time. And it's just so stunningly simple. Oftentimes in medicine, we think, the cure for this has got to be really complicated. And this one's not. It's just rein it in.
Although I will say it's easier said than done. You would think it's simple, and it's like this, the thing that needs to be done is very simple, but it's like almost like the old talk shows where someone's doing something that's bad for them, and then Oprah Feldani would say, "Cut that out." Well, yeah, but I think a lot of folks know on some level that they have a problem with it, but they don't always know, how can I do this, or where do I start to rein it in? Of course, a lot of that's in our book, but it's hard to know those first steps and practical advice to how do you begin to be the master of this instead of letting it master you.
And it is so ubiquitous that it is hard to rein it in. Like you're saying, it's everywhere, and because of that, it's a constant flood of temptation kind of thing.
Well, give us the first step. I know Nora's got questions lined up, but you brought it up. Give us the first step of if somebody is starting to have a sense that I've gone too far on this, I'm in too deep. What's something that they can do to help get them on the right path?
Yeah, one of the first steps that we talk about early in the book is doing an audit. And that sounds not really exciting, but really it is just powerful. Just count things up. Count up the number of hours in the day you do this particular thing with the screen. Count up the number of times you grab your phone out of your pocket or your purse. Count up the number of internet connected devices you have at your home or in your possession. Any of those things, just count them up. The other thing you can do is, once you count them up, then you can do some kind of simple math. So if you're like, okay, this was one day of my life, what's 7 days? What's 30 days? What's a whole year? And that compound number can be staggering, kind of scary.
Yeah, and I would add, I think even before the issue of what do I do with when I realize I have a problem, the first step is really just awareness of the problem. There's something called the stages of change model in psychology, and the first step is called pre-contemplation, where someone has a problem but doesn't even realize it. So I think one of the quick ways to figure out if you have a problem, and an audit can be part of figuring that out, is that you figure out, if I have a problem with this, then it means that I may have some dependence on it. Maybe something I feel like I can't live without, or pervades my life, so that's it's seeping into my dinner time and my church time and whatnot. And so the first way to check it is to say, can I turn this thing off and just be away from it for a while? And if you feel like you can't turn it off, or you're chained to this big heavy steel ball, then you might have a problem. And then you go further into the audit, and then you get a nice roadmap of where you're at, and then you say, okay, and now I know the lay of the land. What step am I going to take to try to pull back, sort of one chunk at a time?
I think it's a good place to start. And I do think those numbers could be rather eye-opening. When I'm just thinking through just today, I'm like, whoa, I know that's already higher than it probably should be. Nora, where do we go next?
Well, I wanted to make a comment on that really quickly. Actually, I'm in a media class currently, and my assignment this week is to track my media usage for an entire week. I'm on day 3, I think. and I am shocked. I thought I was, definitely on the lower range for my age, for a college student, but it's a lot higher than I'd care to admit. But I like to use these kinds of circumstances and situations. Just I'll delete Instagram, for a week and kind of see where I'm at the end of that, and just do like those fastings. I think you guys talked about that in the book as well. And that is such an awesome tool to use when you're just too dependent. You just cut it out for a while, see how it changes.
Cut it out, and the other thing too that cut it out or bury it, make it a little harder to get. One of the things too that's just been really powerful is setting your phone to grayscale. And if you set your phone to grayscale, it is the worst user experience in the world. But because of that, you will only use it for essential purposes because it's not that dopamine stimulation.
That was eye-opening when you first mentioned that, and I tried it. I'm like, whoa. Yeah.
And I will add that even though a lot of our statistics say, it's really bad, it's probably worse than we think it is, because we know, and anytime they've studied people, and a lot of studies were based on self-report. But when we've studied things based on more direct observations of use, the use is a lot higher than folks are self-reporting. So it's actually probably a little worse than we even think in terms of these numbers of seconds and minutes and hours that we put into this digital tech.
Right. It's even to the point where, like last night, I was watching one of the baseball games and commercial breaks come on. And what do? I grab my phone immediately. And, because it's not as stimulating for me. And so I turn to something else that's more stimulating. And I'm like, wait, I can't do this. This is not okay. But that being said, what are some of the benefits that technology has on mental health?
Yeah, I often feel, I'll let Dr. Smith talk about the mental health thing, but one thing Elizabeth was saying early on, sometimes I ask, do you want me to be pro-technology or anti-technology? And I feel like I'm often anti, even though it's a fascinating thing for me and a thing that I study and did my graduate work in and everything. The reason why I often point out the flaws and not the benefits is I think we have so much accelerator on why we should use these and not enough brakes. And so that's the thing. I think we really tried to be not anti-technology, tried to raise up the benefits of it as much as we could. But just a lot of it is the critique of let's take a deep breath and see the flaws here before because I think commercials tell us all about the benefits. So anyway, as far as the benefits, Dr. Smith, I'm sure, would have better insights than me on that.
Well, my entire livelihood now rests on platforms like Zoom, because I am an outpatient child psychiatrist, and where I work currently, there's no in-person care, and so it allows me to see my patients. And I was actually even doing telehealth even before the COVID pandemic. But my choice is to be in a room with someone like this, or see them like this and interact. So I'd like to be in person, but I really feel blessed that at least I have that tool, because I don't know what I would have done in the past without that tool in terms of maintaining connected to my patients. So and I try to be thoughtful about the the appropriate use of Zoom, but I do think that even though it doesn't substitute for in person, that it does allow us to tread water during tough times and have some connections that otherwise would be hard to have. I mean, I can't imagine when I was a kid, if you had a pen pal, you'd write a letter and ship it off, and then weeks later maybe hear back from someone. I mean, there are some definitely nice things about these smartphones. But once again, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but nonetheless, you want to try to maximize your positive use of this stuff and minimize the negative aspects. And the more thoughtful you are about it, the better the experience you'll have with digital technology.
Just to double back, Doris asked the question, Trevor, what is grayscale? So for our viewers who aren't familiar with grayscale and how to make that happen, can you give us a quick tutorial?
Yeah, and the settings of a phone, but I think probably laptops too, and many other devices, you can manipulate the accessibility settings, and that would be like the display, the colors and things like that. And a lot of them have an option for grayscale, and grayscale is where there's no color. It's just different shades of gray. Because of that, it's far less stimulating. But yeah, so if you go to your somewhere in the utilities, that kind of area in your phone or any device, a lot of times you can find a way to set to grayscale.
Yeah.
Now, back to what else we're talking about, I think a lot of what we're talking about makes me think, and Deb has a comment about, I myself struggling to allow true quiet time or downtime. I think my children, at least, I think treat boredom as a lethal disease.
Who do
And
mine?
boredom is good. It's good to be bored sometimes because then creativity happens. You know, there's thoughtfulness. To be able to sit with quietness and lack of doing stuff is great, but I think a lot of folks avoid it like the plague. And so I think instead you have this multitasking where, you know, your attention is always directed to one quick thing or another. And often we know that multitasking doesn't work. Even younger children, nope, not good at it, because we've studied it. And whenever you study multitasking, if you have a setup where a number of folks are forced to do one thing at a time, focus on that thing, and then move to the next thing, they actually overall, compared to the folks that are allowed to do whatever they want and multitask, are more efficient, less errors. They get through it quicker when you do one thing at a time. And multitasking a little bit is sort of fun, but when it's your main mode of operating, once again, it takes more time and it's more error prone. And I think, unfortunately, we live in a society now where multitasking has become sort of the norm, even though as humans, we're not built to multitask.
Well, we take it as a badge of, badge of pride. Oh, I can multitask and get all this done. Growing up when I was a kid, anytime that I would say, I'm bored, my dad shot back with, you need to learn to be bored. And at the time that drove me crazy, but now I'm saying it to my kids because it's so true. I mean, how hard is it for us adults now with these phones to stand in line at the grocery store without pulling out our phone for those 3 minutes we have to wait for our turn to check out? I mean, it's really startling when you think about how we have lost, like Deb was mentioning, it's hard to find that quiet time or to be still. And technology and our being addicted to technology can make that very difficult.
And you mentioned the adults. I think also as adults, we have a duty to be good role models for our kids. And so I know for sure if you tell your kids, hey, I read this book, you're looking at this stuff too much, and then you look at you and you're over there, playing Candy Crush, or you're looking up your own buddies in their parties or something. Kids say you're full of it. I'm not going to follow what you do because you're showing me how adults act. And so I think it's very important for the adults to make their own changes first, not just point at the kids and say, oh, those darn kids, but look at ourselves. And I think that's, we all know action speaks louder than words.
Nora, what you got?
So how can, with all of this stimulation and just the wide web at our fingertips and in our pockets, how can we resist the temptation in technology?
So yeah, I think there's several kind of facets to it, and to say there's one thing to do is oversimplifying it. And I think that's kind of a thing that comes throughout the course of the book, is that it's not just going to be one silver bullet. But I think one thing that we pointed out is that awareness of dependency, the awareness of how enmeshed we are in it, that sort of thing. We talk a little bit about the how do you make these things harder to access, that sort of thing. Also other ways, Sabbath. I think, Nora, you even mentioned that you take a Sabbath of some sort for technology. Fasting, I guess, would be another way to put that. But that idea of how do you exert control over this thing? Well, by saying, I don't need you for a day. I don't need you for a week. That sort of thing. And I'm going to put you on airplane mode and show that I have agency over this thing. So certainly that awareness, but then developing that muscle and that habit of being able to say no and realize that the world doesn't fall apart and actually things might be better. Those practices are helpful.
In terms of that habit, I would piggyback and say that I think a lot of these feelings, as far as when you're away from digital technology, the feelings are worse before they get better. So I think immediately, when you put your phone away, you can, for an hour or so, you feel sort of panicked. And what if someone tried to call me? I don't know if you're that important, but it's like I'm needed. But then you find out. I know I've had a lot of folks tell me when they go do things like camping or whatnot, that the first day or so, it's so weird being without their phones and without their other stuff. But then it sort of feels normal after a while again. And nobody's around, and really you get this sort of peace, especially nature and stuff like that you otherwise couldn't get. And I also feel like it's very hard to just not do something. It's much more easy to do something else. So I think once again, like stab of the weather, I think if a thought is, I'm going to take a break for a little bit from digital tech, don't just put the phone away and just sit on the sofa and squirm. Go out and go for a hike, or get together with a group of friends, or do something active to try to substitute for that other activity.
And another thing, just as Brian's saying that, thinking more about in that time of I'm not doing this, sort of why am I doing this? Like, what is the, I don't know, if you peel back the layers on that, that can be a revealing thing of what is this giving me? What am I longing for? And a thing that we tried to really put throughout the entire book is how the gospel really can be a freeing, liberating thing in the sense of our relationship with technology. So this book is not just a bunch of law, like don't do this, you should do that, don't do this, but letting the gospel be at the center, and then the right relationship flowing out of that. So in the sense of thinking about likes on Facebook or Instagram, like I think those are there because we have a deep desire to be liked. And there's no surprise why they're so contagious and why we want them. But this idea that, well, in Jesus, you're more than liked. You're loved. And you've been claimed as his own and made into a new creation through faith in him. And letting that realization, like, I don't need superficial thumbs up because God's given me the biggest thumbs up ever in the cross and the empty tomb and says, you're mine. And so I think in some sense that reflection can be a powerful antidote as well.
So when we talk about redeeming technology, and you gave the perfect segue, Trevor, because you went to where I was planning to take us. Tell us what does it mean to redeem technology, where we get back to where we have a right perspective on things? What does that look like?
So we kind of play with that language, redeeming, and obviously, redeeming is buying back. And so in one sense, we want to just talk about how can you buy this thing back? How can you gain it back if it's been lost and misused or enslaved in some way? How can it be redeemed? And that's certainly one way that we talk about it. But also, more broadly, the idea of redeeming technology, kind of playing on that language of has God used redeeming technology to bring about a right relationship with his creatures? And a couple ways we talk about that. The cross is redeeming technology. It sounds strange to say, but it is a form of technology, a very violent technique and tool that ancient empires used to kill people. And God said, all right, I can take that technology and I can flip it on its head and I can redeem that thing, as horrific and gruesome as it is. I can bring life into the mix through that. The Bible, in a lot of ways, is redeeming technology. It's media, it's paper, it's papyrus, it's the Holy Spirit inspiring authors to bring about the Word of God. But that's the Word of God through an ancient technology. And so, in a lot of ways, it's amazing to think about how has God been on the vanguard of redeeming technology, and then how do we follow in that as his people?
Nora, what's next?
So how then can we use this is kind of going off of what you were talking about. How can we use technology then to help the mission of the church?
It's interesting. I think sometimes we think, well, okay, if I post things on Facebook that are Bible verses, now I'm doing it. And again, I think throughout, Brian and I have tried to resist superficial answers. And so I think, really what Brian had mentioned about leading by example, that can be a powerful for the church to stand in healthy opposition to a world that is addicted to these sorts of things. That would be a way that the body of Christ can use this for good and godly purposes. But then obviously the ways that we get to, we've talked about it as like the modern Appian way, like this road that, just imagine in the ancient world, there was the Appian way. That was a road that you would walk on this road and you'd interact with people who don't know Jesus, and the gospel would spread to different communities. But now we have this incredible modern Appian way. But the question is, how do we navigate that in healthy ways? But how do we navigate that with the spread of the gospel? I think it's not just superficial. I've posted John 3:16. I'm done. It can be more. Who am I bumping up against, interacting with through these digital mediums? And in that, especially the personal kind of Zoom interactions, how am I shining the light of Christ into that?
And that's why they need to examine I think some of the algorithms behind some of these, big companies and whatnot, because instead of having an Appian way, we have, one road where everyone agrees with each other is on over here, another road where, folks get stirred up and agitated and whatnot. And there's not really much ability for folks to have more open discussion and talk about tough things and disagree and agree to disagree, but in a way that, really leads to beautiful things and doesn't further divide, and cause folks to be more unhappy. So I think unfortunately some of the algorithms are really based on, once again, intense emotions, and emotions and feelings, they can lie. They're not always the best way to work through things.
I like the kind of the contrast where we've got the algorithms and then the media companies. I mean, they're looking at the numbers and they're looking at, let's get more people on the platform. Let's get more people using it. Let's get more people basically hooked. But then earlier, as you were talking about your audit, like doing an audit. So we need to look at the numbers, our personal numbers, just circling back to that. And I just kind of like that contrast of, let's look at our healthy use and figure out where we're at, because that's going to be in direct opposition to what the companies out there really want us to do. And so to be able to find that balance of where we can lead by example and have that healthy relationship, it's tricky in this modern age.
Yeah, these companies are not going to do it for us. I mean, the main motive, for many corporations, and it's okay. I mean, corporations, it's very helpful also. There's generation of capital and things like that. But, we can't necessarily trust corporations to always be the ones looking out for these, once again, unintended consequences. We have to be able to also be reflective ourselves and police ourselves, because you can't, trust, the wolf with the hen house or whatever sort of cliches you kind of have. So I think it's good to be very thoughtful about how we examine things, because we can't assume that inherent in sort of man's creation of this technology, that there always is that thoughtfulness in terms of how it affects individuals in our society.
And what's hard is a lot of times we use these things as the public forum and town hall, but it's not a neutral town hall, because there's stakeholders that have kind of set the parameters for the town hall meeting. And that's where I think finding ways to have public forum, town hall, those kinds of interactions as communities that are off of these things, that might be a fruitful thing.
Nora, do you have any reflections before I ask a couple final questions?
I think just one thing to add, both of you guys talked about this, but I think it's just so important to remember that social media and media technology is just like, it can be used as an asset. We can use that to spark conversation and to build community, but it's the face-to-face conversations that's what matters. That's what we need as, created individuals. So definitely using social media, remembering that it's an amazing tool, but it is not the end all be all.
It's exactly what you're saying. I was leading a men's Bible study, and we were looking at 2 John, and the end of 2 John, he says something to the effect of like, I've come to you with ink and paper, but I long to come to you face to face, so that your joy may be full. And in Greek, it's soma pro soma, like literally kind of mouth to mouth, or just that kind of like, that's the intimacy of it. But it just was stunning to me, where I'm like, even Scripture kind of points this out to us, that yes, media does something, and the word is proclaimed through that, but there's still this fullness of joy that comes face to face.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to realize that online life is for especially a lot of young folks, it is a big part of life. It is life in many ways, but you Facebook friends can't take the place of like friends face to face. You can't have online life eclipse the other aspects of our life. I mean, online life is going to be part of things. We have to make sure that online life does not become the center of our universe. We talk about in the book how it's part of redeeming technology is that technology has its place, but it can't be at the center of our existence.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up, what encouragement do you each have, knowing that this is a big part of our lives? It's a big struggle for many people. It's all over the news right now, and it'll probably ebb and flow in terms of visibility, but it's not, the challenges of technology are not going away. Trevor, as you just mentioned, even in Bible times, there was a challenge of it. What encouragement do you have for us as we strive to keep this creation of technology in its proper place?
I think a couple things. I think asking the question. We've talked about this in the podcast a while ago, but John the Baptist saying, I must decrease, Christ must increase. And just that powerful thing of I think unencouragement, especially the kind of, what's the unique corner that the Christian faith has on this conversation, and it is the gospel. This is a thing that no other part of the technology conversation will have is how does Jesus free me from this dependency? And so I think in a lot of ways, I think the most fruitful advice I have is consider how the good news of Jesus liberates us to then have Jesus at the center, and then these things finding their proper place. Brian was alluding to this in the book. We talk about the Ptolemaic universe, and the Ptolemaic universe, they had the Earth, in the center, and all the other planets were moving around it, and the wrong thing was in the center, and it was a jumbled mess, and they couldn't accurately predict the movement of stars and the planets because the wrong thing was in the middle. And so I think that would be my biggest thing, is just if the right thing, if Jesus is in the middle, everything else finds its proper place. And that's true not just for technology, but that's true for relationships and money and everything else. But that's the key thing, reflecting on how the gospel liberates us from this dependency, and then frees us to use it in healthy ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think once again that we, this is this is a challenge, but this is something that definitely we can take on and can overcome. This is very, very doable. The Bible is the roadmap. And I think that we have at least had the technology now long enough that we sort of are understanding it better. And then we can make sure, once again, that these are tools that we use and that don't use us.
Wise words from our dynamic dream team of pastor-psychiatrist dream team of Trevor Sutton and Brian Smith.
Can I be Scottie Pippen if we're the dream team?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation. I'm glad you were able to both be with us today to chat with us about this. And for our viewers, keep dropping your comments and questions in the chat as if you're watching this on the replay, and we'll do our best to come back in and respond as we go along. We'll keep an eye on that. And we've dropped a link in the comments also to Redeeming Technology, a Christian approach to building healthy digital habits. Nora's got hers ready to go. And I really do encourage you to check it out. If you go to the link in the comments, you'll be able to download a sample chapter and dig in right away. And it's really a topic and a book that should be on our radar right now as we engage with our communities around us about technology and these big issues. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Thanks, Nora.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
See everyone next time.